Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And I am the Programming and Logistics Co-Chair for the Afghan-American Women's Collective. For those viewers who are not familiar with our organization, we're a group of passionate women that came together to create a supportive and empowering space for Afghan-American women. Our mission is to provide resources through education, networking, and community building to empower Afghan-American women in achieving career and personal success. We're so excited to have this opportunity to continue our panel series tonight with everyone. And in the spirit of Mother's Day, we wanted to have a discussion around the maternal figures in our lives. So typically when you're asked about a woman who inspires you or that you look up to or as a mentor, it's very easy to name our mothers. We all know that our mothers are strong, they're resilient. But what about the other women in our lives? The Bibis, the Khalas, or Amas, family, friends, whoever it may be, people that we work with, maybe even, what role do they have in shaping our values, our experiences, our relationships, and our general outlook on life? Do we consider these women mentors? Also, how do we navigate difficult conversations with the women in our lives? So just trying to figure out, what a maternal figure is, I decided to rely on Google because Google knows all, right? This description came up, which I thought was really, really great. So I'm going to share that with you guys. It's a woman embodying, so a maternal figure is a woman embodying or seeming to embody the qualities of an idealized conception of the female parent, eliciting from others the emotional responses that a child typically has toward her own mother. So with that said, we're going to get through 2 introductions, and I just wanted to quickly share a personal story in that, a maternal figure doesn't have to be deep. So there's a woman in my life who I grew up with who she just really, really organized in her life. Her home was always spotless. And I remember, as a child spending time in her home thinking that, one day when I grow up, if I get married, and I always, had this thing of like getting married, I'm going to have my house look exactly like hers. From learning to fold laundry and like organizing like my kitchen, I always keep her in mind and what, her house looked like. So, she's inspired me in that way. So I'm going to go over to, our first member, Mina. Mina, if you can go ahead and just share your introduction and short story with us.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mina. I live in San Francisco, and I am the Networking and Engagement Chair for AAWC. I actually don't have a ton of family here in the States, so having maternal figures, I think, is something that I've always looked for outside of just my mom. I think that there are definitely qualities that you can possess and find in people that aren't related to you. And then when it came to, like, besides the necessities and duties of the responsibilities of being an Afghan-American woman, that I definitely learned from my family, I learned to find that other guidance from, like, as far as education or career outside. And it took me a long time to learn that it was okay to look for that guidance outside of my family. And definitely as an adult, learning that there are plenty of people and plenty of women in our community that you can look for, and it doesn't have to be a taboo thing to look outside of your home to get that guidance.
Hi, my name is Hamaira, and I am also the Programming Logistics Chair. I work with Samaya, and I live in Orange County. And my story is also a personal one, like Samaya. And I have to say, with the maternal figures in my life, that I actually see as something great is the fact that they just seem to know how to put everything together. Like when there's a mimoni, it can happen in 2 hours, and I feel like they're able to make 10 dishes in that 2 hours. And I really look up to that because that's something that is so hard for me. So I think that's just an amazing quality and feature in our, at least in my maternal figures, and I inspired to be something like that one day. It's my story.
Hi, everyone. I'm Fatima, and maternal figures, and this is something so near and dear to my heart. I've been raised by really strong women in my family, and that means my mom and all of my khalas, my older cousins, and they've just been so central to so many things in my life and so many decisions and the paths I've taken that there's just so much about this topic that I feel that we can explore and talk about, and I'm really excited to get into.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yasaman. I'm the Executive Director of AAWC. I feel like everyone has already kind of said my thoughts about maternal figures, but I also grew up with very strong Afghan women. And I looked up to each of them, I think, for different things. So one of them, whether it was for professional reasons, one of them, whether it was just being able to have a very vulnerable relationship with them, or someone else for just being an overall badass in every single way that they've lived their lives. And I think it's been really awesome to have so many people that you not only look up to, but there is that like maternal characteristic about them that we can talk about a little bit more later that is able to engage you in ways that maybe you can't with other people in your lives.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing. So with the introductions, we're going to go ahead and jump into our questions. So one of the first questions that we wanted to discuss is how do you define a maternal figure? What qualities do you look for? And I'll go ahead and answer that to start with. So, I definitely look for an emotional connection, like a nurturing connection. That's really what I would define as a maternal figure, is that they could be strong and assertive, but in this, at the same time, they're nurturing. And I often find myself comparing women to my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who was very strong, loving, kind, but not just to her immediate family, to everyone. She was central to, our extended family. She had, so much respect. People gave her so much respect, and she gave, just as much respect back. And so I feel like I've set the bar high, because I find, like, again, even sometimes I even compare my own mother to her mother. I'm like, she was this way and she's this way. But I also think confidence is key. I look for confidence. I'm really attracted to women who are confident in their decisions. So for me, I guess it's not, a lot of times we think of a maternal figure, somebody who's older than us, but I don't necessarily like attach an age to it, because I take inspiration from really, like, different women in my life, and regardless of their age, so yeah, that's how I would define a maternal figure. And Yasaman, I'll throw it to you.
Yeah, I think in addition to everything you said, one other characteristic that I look for in a maternal figure, or characteristic that I think many of them have that I go to, is that they're very loving. And I think this is kind of the difference between like a mentor and a maternal figure. Not that a mentor is not loving. I think they can be, but I don't think that's necessarily a trait that I look for. And I think for maternal figures, in addition to everything else you just mentioned, there is this element of like, I feel loved. I get these other positive vibes from them that almost makes it feel like a family relationship. Doesn't necessarily mean it is. And I think this is how maternal figures for me can be outside of my immediate family, or like not be blood at all. And yeah, I think, being nurturing, but also I think loving. Even a lot of the women that I look up to at work, who I see more of like as a maternal figure, like I think the main distinction there is that I can just be like, oh, I'm having a bad day, can I have a hug? So yeah.
I agree with what both you, Yasemin and Samaya are saying about that. So I do see the maternal figure as someone who's patient, strong, trustworthy. I see them as being respectful of my ideas, loving and supportive as well. I really see them as being the rock that I can fall back on. So with this person, I agree with you all. It can be someone within your family, like your mother, or grandmother, aunt, sister, whatever that may be, but also someone outside, not being your bloodline. So your friend, your teacher, could even be your neighbor or a manager at work. It really can be anyone. It all, for me at least, comes down to the qualities that that person has that are important to me, and whether or not I have that trust and that feeling towards them.
Yeah, those are all really great points. And just reminded me of like being in high school and having this one high school counselor who was like, who I could walk in whenever I was like stressed out about school, whatever, anything that was going on. Like I could walk in to her office and she knew immediately that I was going through something and she would shut the door. And she would step in, or like conversation where I couldn't have with my mother. She would step in and, she was still maternal. So the next question that we have on our list is, how has having a maternal figure in your life benefited you, or lack thereof? How has that impacted you? So I briefly, I guess, kind of answer that question and sharing my story of that counselor, of how stepping in when I was navigating, the Afghan-American, the American side of me, she would step in and kind of like fill that void and really help me guide through those issues. But I'm going to throw it over to Fatima.
Yeah, I love that you had that, Samaya. That's amazing. You had something like at home and at school. I think that's actually really similar to me too. I've had so many different types of maternal figures in my life. Definitely, my mom and my aunts, my grandma, they all were, those figures in my life that just kept me feeling rooted and like knowing where I came from and just having that heritage and like Afghan culture. I know it can be a bit like negative sometimes, but there are aspects of their of their roles in my life that just really I gained so much positivity from. The whole like we're all about family, communities, sharing with one another and just building that network. I think was able to really just propel me in life into meeting other people. And then when I would, when I needed, a maternal figure outside of those roles, like looking for jobs, or, I was being frustrated with things that, the maternal figures at home didn't necessarily relate to. Like they didn't know what it was like to go to college or, go to high school here, or, interact with people that weren't Afghan, who didn't understand your culture. And then I had individuals like that where I could, vent my frustrations to. And it just really helped me stay very sane. And then also just, it helped me stay really positive because I had people to go to that were helping me when I felt down or negative or low. So yeah, huge impact.
Fatima, I definitely agree with what you mentioned about having your mom there to help like reinstill your roots and keep you grounded. I definitely felt like my mom did that and instilled that in me for my Afghan side, but I felt like there was kind of a difficulty with embracing my American side in terms of like having a maternal figure that would nurture that. I was fortunate enough that one of my aunts who was born in Afghanistan, came here when she was a teenager. She kind of got it a little bit. So I'm the only girl, so I didn't have any older sisters to help me kind of like give me that nurturing side, but understand that this dual identity that we have. And my aunt definitely was there for me. I remember like in 8th grade, we had 8th grade graduation party And I was really nervous. I knew my mom would be really upset because in her eyes, it's probably going to be some kind of dance. There's going to be boys, and what are you going to wear? All of this stuff. And my aunt was so great, so supportive. She made me a dress from scratch that was like modest, so I don't have to worry about my mom being upset or anything like that. Totally supported the conversation and like having it with my parents of like, hey, it's not anything to freak out about. It's just a celebration. You know, this is just kind of like a rite of passage in life. She doesn't have to go with a date. She doesn't have to have a boy involved. But like having that guidance and like that she was, I mean, more of an older sister figure there. And then also in terms of like getting an education, she was the first person in our family to, first woman in our family to go get her bachelor's. She's a nurse now, has since gone on, gotten her master's, and is totally was my role model from a really young age, because I knew that she had to overcome a lot of obstacles because, I mean, my grandfather didn't really support her going and getting an education because it was such a foreign thing for women in our family to go to school rather than stay at home and be like normal housewives. But she definitely helped guide me through that, through having the conversations with my parents. They've always been supportive about getting an education, but like how to navigate situations and difficult conversations for situations that my family hasn't been in before. So although she didn't necessarily wasn't born and raised here, still doesn't have the same experience as being like Afghan-American like I do. I definitely felt that guidance that she gave me outside of having my mom there was really beneficial, and I really appreciated it. It definitely impacted my life a lot.
Yeah, and just going off of what you said, Mina, I have an older sister who definitely went through a lot of the roadblocks that maybe my younger sister and I didn't have to face because she went through it first. And so I think having that was helpful, and that because she did experience it herself, she could then speak and be like, hey, I've already gone through this. It's not that bad. You don't have to be so hard on the other two and let them do X, Y, and Z. And this is all in relation. A lot of it's in relation to the school, because for us, the school part was also tied in with the social part as well. So like the friends that we have, those friends were from school, or the events were through school. And so I feel like my older sister did a lot in her maternal figure way of opening up the door, making it easier for us to go through certain life experiences, because she went through it herself and was able to be like, you guys didn't let me do it, but you guys can't let Yasman and Susan go through the same experience. Like that's not fair. And then with my older, we have cousins that are maybe like 15 to like maybe 10 years older than us, who, when they came to America, were like really young. I think one of them was born here, and they, I would say, like paved a lot of like the directions that we would eventually go in. So attending college, or what is it called in the sex ed classes. Like I remember when like the notes would come home of like asking permission from parents if they could attend these classes. And at first, like our parents would be like, oh, I don't know, like I don't want my kids learning about things that we don't want them learning about. And I remember my older cousins being like, are you gonna have this discussion with them? And they'd be like, no. And it's like, well, then might as well let their teachers have these discussions with them in a school setting where it's going to be better than having some outsider come in and tell them about all these things. So I think it was also like my older sister went to science camp and having to be gone for a whole week, and that had never happened before, and older cousins being able to step in and be like, no, that's okay, or it's not as scary as you think. I also have two aunts that I from my mom's side who I feel like would also jump in a lot too. One of them has a daughter that's older than us, and one of them has a daughter that's younger. But I think it was also nice for my mom to hear multiple perspectives. Her younger sister was, I think, like 15, 16 when she came to America. So she definitely, when she was a bit more accustomed with the culture, and the older one, she had a daughter herself, so she had gone through it, and they were able to give tips or advice to my mom too, in terms of this is okay or it's fine. But I also think my mom herself did a really good job keeping an open mind with a lot of these things too. So her, in addition to all these other maternal figures in our lives, I think really helped kind of open up opportunities for myself and my sisters in ways that I think if coming back to the Afghan-American experience, that I think maybe someone who wasn't Afghan-American and didn't quite understand the context of our situation wouldn't be able to help.
Yeah, those are some really, really great points. And it's like that older sibling or older cousin or aunt that kind of goes through all those hurdles and just really makes it easier for us. I definitely have those figures in my life too. I have aunts that are, or an aunt that, is just 10 years older than myself. I have, first or second cousins that, so they certainly helped in certain situations, like navigate, certain conversations, as far as me having relationships, like just going through school, right? Like school, like dances. I was actually now that I think about it, pretty blessed. Like even in middle school, like my parents let me go to school dances. Like, I was going with my friends, but they were pretty like open to that. And I think, it was partly just having the influence of these women whom my mom was really, really close to, going through some of the experiences and just explaining like how important it is to socialize and how, middle school or high school can be pretty brutal, and those social environments are pretty can be important. So with that said, how do you maintain these healthy relationships with these women? And so I'm going to throw it back to you, Yasaman.
Yeah, so when I first saw this question, I was like really thinking about it, and to be honest, I don't even think I do a good job maintaining healthy relationships with these women. Like I think, and this is more like a personal issue of just being better at building relationships and maintaining them. But I think if you go back to how I originally answered the other question about, I look for women that are like both nurturing and loving, I think it's important for us to do the same back, right? It's a two-way relationship. And I think I appreciate the love and support and nurture that I get from these maternal figures. And I think sometimes I lack when it comes to not necessarily like the loving part. It's not that I'm not appreciative of it, but it requires action. It requires initiative, and it requires going out of your way to check in and see how people are doing and to return that favor some way, somehow, attending a party that they're throwing, or just checking in. And all my aunts and uncles text now, so even sending a text and being, how are you doing? Just wanted to check in. Everyone, like my aunts live like 20, 30 minutes away from where I live now. Like my mom lives about an hour and a half away from where I live. And I think being able to love them and nurture them and in their way, right? I think there's certain ways that they're doing it to us, and finding ways that means a lot to them. Like I personally don't like memonis, and I try to avoid them at all costs. But I also know there's times where my mom will be like, can you just like attend? And even though I don't want to go, I think it is a way that means a lot to her, to have at least one of her daughters, one of her representatives there with her. And so it's just kind of being understanding of that and being like, that is a way that she takes in love. And that is the way that she feels nurtured and that she feels appreciated and she feels seen. And being able to find out what that is for your maternal figures in your life and being able to reciprocate it back to them.
Yeah, Yasaman, I 100% agree with you that it takes some considerable effort to develop that healthy relationship, but it also takes continued focus and time to maintain that relationship. So for me, communication is key. So to be able to communicate with that person and to be able to talk to them freely, like you said, be able to text or call or whatnot whenever it's needed, but also to be able to trust that person and know that I'm able to call and text and go to these mimonis and do whatever without them judging me or saying anything behind my back. So for me, it's just important to be able to trust them, but also to have that communication back and forth between the two of us.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Just a follow-up question I just thought about right now. Obviously, we know how we want to feel loved and appreciated and how we want help. I just want to throw it out back to you guys. Maybe it depends based on the relationship that you have with the maternal figure, but how do you guys figure out if they feel the same way about you, like not maternally, but that they, you know, they like you and they love you and they enjoy being a part of your lives.
So if I were to answer it in one word, it'd have to be that communication piece of it. Like I said, for me, and it could be, I keep saying communication because that's my number one strength. And so I think it's just that bond is formed to me with any relationship by keeping close. And by keeping close, I feel like it's by being able to see each other, communicate with each other, and being honest with each other. So that's what I think.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just when people just show up, you know, like, because a lot of the people I'm close to, they live, you know, they live far from me. You know, they either live in San Diego or they live in the Bay Area, and I'm in Los Angeles. They show up, you know, when we're going through something, or even in our happy times, or in our sadness, you know, they're just there. They show up, and even if we don't stay in contact, like if I'm not calling them or they're not calling me, it's just when we see each other, we pick up, you know, right where we left off, and it's effortless, right? Like we don't, they don't um, kind of give me a hard time, you know, about not calling them, or you know, because they just know like my intention. They know how much I love them, and it's just a two-way street. So it's just, for me, it's really big. Like, you know, I try when they're have something going on in their lives, like I try to show up, you know, I'm there. And same thing for me, you know, that they're present when I really, really, you know, need them to be.
I totally agree. I feel like the maternal figures in my life, like my mom, my cousins, my aunts, they feel loved, or the way that they show that they appreciate or love me as well is quality time. Like, I don't know if you guys have read the Five Languages of Love, but the women in my family definitely, I feel like 100% the first language of love is quality time. So no matter, not just for like, oh, you're coming over from Imani or anything like that. Like, it doesn't have to be anything formal. It is literally just, hey, I was home. I know, like, I personally don't live too close to family. I live like an hour and a half away as well. So it's kind of difficult with like work and, you know, other family obligations and things to make time to go out and see them. And so they know that the very rare time that I am home, visiting like my parents or anything like that, that if I do spend time and take the time to go be with them, that they really appreciate it. It is literally just showing up, FaceTime, us, you know, talking over chai or whatever it may be, like catching up on all the gossip or like watching TV together or whatever it may be. You know, just asking about how family is, how work is, how life is. I think it's the best. I mean, me personally, that's the way that I feel loved as well, is when people make time for me that way. And I definitely feel that they reciprocate in the same way as well.
Yeah, Mina, quality time is huge. I think that's part of how I know that I feel and experience their love. I think Homaida, you mentioned communication. I think that's another one that I'm gonna also, say that that's huge with me. I think that the maternal figures in my life are always all about being very loving and expressing that a lot. Like, it's just definitely this huge warm, like, family feeling that's just spread all around. And when they're not doing that, like, oh, did I do something wrong? Like, do I need to make sure that they're feeling the love that they need from me? Because obviously it's a two-way street, like you said, Yasman. And so yeah, every single time, like, I know that I'm very loved because they're just always expressing it, always letting me know. So I really appreciate it. I'm super grateful for it. But yeah.
Yeah, so thanks, guys. That was a really good question to bring up, Yasso. So thank you. So with that said, like we've really focused so far, like on how you know, these women are loving, and how, you know, we get love from them, and they're nurturing, and how good they make us feel. But what about those uncomfortable conversations? So, you know, what are some uncomfortable conversations? How do you navigate these difficult conversations? I mean, do you even bring them up? Do you even talk about these things? You know, so if you choose not to, why? And it could be anything, right? A career, education, life, cultural taboos, health. So I am going to throw it over to you, Fatima.
Oh my gosh, uncomfortable conversations. It's definitely like it's always this balancing act that I'm doing. I'm making sure that like okay, one strategy that I use quite often is if another person, like let's say I want to have an uncomfortable conversation with my mom, but I can't bring it up, and someone, her friend or you know her sister or around her age is bringing up that topic. It could be something like around I don't know, like dating. Like my mom was just not okay with me talking about boys at all. And then now I'm like in my late 20s and it's like, okay, so what's going on? And everyone's just like, all right. And now that that's coming up, I'm like, okay, well, I can use this as a talking point. I can have a conversation with my mom about what I would like to do in terms of like, do I want to get married? Do I want to date? Do I want to talk to people, like more people, and just start involving her in that process and getting her to understand that, you know, you don't just magically have a partner. And that it does take some work, and you know obviously at this point she understands that like an arranged marriage or her setting me up with someone is just it's not going to fly, and that was also an extremely difficult conversation because there was a learning curve, like even my aunts, like everyone really had to realize that okay, like Fatima's kind of a stubborn person and she's very independent and she wants to do things her way. And seeing as how this is not our lives, we need to let her do it her way. But, you know, having those kinds of difficult conversations, like it's never easy. That's why it's a difficult conversation. And it takes a lot of work and a lot of patience. And I'm not going to say that, oh, yeah, I was so patient and cool headed every single time. Like, I definitely got into arguments and sometimes, you know, voices were raised. And it wasn't even like, please let me do this, I want to do this thing. It was more like, you don't understand where I'm coming from, and it's extremely frustrating. And so it's just like, and then but when you finally reach that point where it's like they're on the same page as you, or you know my mom's on the same page as me, I'm on the same page as her, we both understand like what we want from this like topic. Like let's say it's something like marriage. At the end of the day, she wants me to be happy and I want me to be happy. And it like takes some time, but eventually it gets there. But yeah, I know that's always a difficult topic. It's a difficult one for a lot of Afghan girls, for a lot of my cousins, and other girls that I know. But I think our moms, our maternal figures are catching up and like realizing that, you know, it's not how they knew it to be. And they're becoming more open to it. But again, that could also just not be the case. I've seen it just not be the case at all.
Yeah, I totally get that. And luckily, you know, they have you, Fatima, to your younger cousins, friends, that have you to kind of help them as a, you know, to look up to, or as a role model, or as a example. So that's great. And then, so for me, it's so funny that you bring up the marriage thing, because I feel like I didn't experience this, but I feel like I've seen it in other women, where they kind of get at an age where family kind of starts getting nervous. Like, well, are they going to get married? Or are they not? Then they're like, well, do you have somebody? And it's like, where before it's like, oh my God, you can't date. You can't talk to anybody. Don't do anything. Don't even look at a boy. But then you get at a certain age, all of a sudden they're like, well, you know, like what's going on? Like, do you have anyone? It's like, well, you know, you become confused. Am I supposed to date or am I not supposed to date? So I think that I'm glad that you brought that up. For me, I think it's interesting because you know, being married and having children, I will not, there are certain things that I will not talk about, you know, with my mom or even the women in my family. Like, I'm super close to my mother-in-law, but I wouldn't even have those conversations with her. And she's probably watching right now too. But an interesting story I can share was I recently, like last year, I ended up in the emergency room with like really bad stomach ache and like all this. So it turns out that I had gallstones. And, so following up, doctor told me, well, you're on birth control, so this may have contributed to your gallstones. So my aunt was visiting, and she's only 10 years older than me, and I'm super close to her. She came to the US when she was probably like 13. She's, went through the whole high school experience. I can speak about a lot of things to her, and she like totally gets it. And so we're talking, and she's like, so how are you feeling? Do you have to have surgery? And I'm like, no. And she's like, well, do you know why you got gallstones? I'm like, well, yeah, I think, and it just naturally came out. And I was like, yeah, well, I was on birth control, so I think it might have been that. And really, like, the birth control is really more so to regulate things, just because, I was having issues, with my period. So, and instead of her focusing on the gallbladder issues, she immediately switched it. Well, why are you on birth control? Well, like, what were you taking? Well, and like her mind just like was totally focused on the birth control. And I became so uncomfortable. And I was like, oh my God, make this stop right now. I totally just changed the conversation. Like, it was so uncomfortable to the point where I was like sweating. I started to sweat, and I was just like, I don't want to have this conversation with you. Like, why did I even say anything? But yeah, I still, when it comes to like health, things like that, just women's health in general, forget like anything like that has to do with like sex or anything like that. Like, I would never have those conversations with the women, with my maternal figures. But so I'm gonna pass it over to Mina to share her thoughts.
I can relate to both Fatima and Samaya, both of your stories so much. In terms of like I again only have brothers. I have 4 brothers, and I have never mentioned any of my like even childhood guy friends. Like, we go to school, we have friends. I play on the playground with these guys. I would never mention them. Never, ever, ever, ever. And now as I'm growing up, and I'm just like, my parents have to know that we work in a dynamic, or at work, or at socializing, or anything like that. Like, I'm going to interact with other boys. So it was always really awkward because I literally, up until maybe like 2 or 3 years ago, I just never would mention any of my guy friends to my parents, just because it was just awkward. I don't want them to feel like it was a reason for them to be suspicious of anything. I just didn't want to. It was like a pick and choose your battles, and I knew it would be a really tender topic to bring up. But it was really uncomfortable, and it's something that I never felt really comfortable talking to my mom about. And then maybe a couple years ago, maybe like a year or 2 ago, the whole marriage thing, it's always, again, I'm the only girl, so like I don't know how they would want me to navigate this whole situation. They know I definitely wouldn't want it to be the whole arranged marriage, that I would want to maybe meet someone on my own, but like how to even introduce that to my parents. There was one day my mom literally got finished praying, and she was turning to, and I'm sitting there on the couch in front of her, and she was just like, if you were to find somebody on your own, like that was Muslim and came from a really good family, like we would be, your father and I would approve. And that just totally like blew my mind, because we never talk about this. We never talk about it, just because, like, again, boys don't exist. But now that I'm come to an age where they want me to settle down and find somebody, they realize that I won't want to do it the traditional way that they had originally set out for me. And so it's weird, because I still kind of don't know, there are no other boundaries, because I don't have an older sister. I don't have my other family members that have gotten married here in the States, definitely did the more traditional route. So I really don't have any guidance of like, at what point, if I am like, seeing somebody, at what point, how do I like introduce that conversation topic to my parents? And also I feel like, there's also like a language barrier that I feel like I have with my mom, because we speak in Portuguese at home, and my Portuguese, I would say, probably on a scale of like 1 to 10. On a good day, it's probably like a 7. But when it comes to like really expressing my feelings or like speaking from the heart, I have a really hard time like relaying that message or that emotion to my mom. And so I feel like it's harder to navigate these conversations, because my language skills are kind of primary. And I definitely can't, and my dad, his English is a lot better, so like I can definitely be more eloquent and speak my mind to him. But I feel like it's definitely not a conversation to have with my dad. But in terms of like having conversations about, you know, women's health or things like that, I remember asking or talking to my mom. I think there was one of my friends had mentioned she was on a prescription like skincare treatment, and the doctor had recommended that she be on birth control as well at the same time. This friend was Afghan, and my mom was just like, "Oh my gosh, that is so taboo. How can those things go hand in hand? How would they allow their daughters?" And I'm just like, you know, like girls take this more than you think. They don't have to be sexually active. Birth control doesn't necessarily equate to being sexually active, but that's what the connection that my mom and a lot of other Afghan women, older generation Afghan women, have. So it was kind of difficult to navigate that conversation with my mom as well, of like, that doesn't necessarily mean this. So I feel like I have definitely learned to just pick and choose my battles when it comes to these uncomfortable conversations, because I'm just like, is it worth the headache? I already feel like I know how my mom feels, and certain things there's just no changing her mind on. So I've kind of learned to take a step back and understand her perspective of like why she's so rigid sometimes, or like other khalas that I have in my family as well, why they take the stance that they do, but like kind of slowly trying to chip away at that. And so I just feel like with time, as I see that it's more common in our community, and that it's not as taboo as initially was, these conversations can be had a little bit more openly.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, those conversations are definitely tricky. But I think, you know, and also, Mina, like my Farsi, I speak Farsi. It's, you know, I speak it pretty well, but I still, when I have these really hard conversations, whether, you know, it's conversations about like health or just really anything, these difficult conversations, like I stumble, I forget words, I get nervous, and just like I don't have the vocabulary to be able to express, you know, my emotions and my feelings around something. And even though I know that if I could just like have, you know, a calm and like, you know, a conversation, especially like with my mom, like she would totally get it. Um, it's just, I don't know, I just get, there's just something in me that I can't get over. And I find it really difficult having those conversations with even, you know, like I said, like even my mother-in-law, you know, she's fluent in English. I speak to her mostly in English. I would even be hesitant to have these conversations with her, even though we say like she's like the wokest person we know, you know. But it's still difficult. It's just like that. I guess, you know. I mean, nobody told me not to have these conversations growing up, right? Nobody directly told me like you can't talk about this. It's just something you learn. So, you know, with that said, you know, how do we plan on changing that? You know, how can our generation of Afghan-American maternal figures help build a more resilient generation of women based on the experiences that we've had? So, you know, what are we? So what are we doing, you know, to differently? What do we plan? Sorry, let me backtrack a little bit. Like, what do we plan on doing differently? I totally butchered that. I'm so sorry. Let me backtrack. So the question was actually supposed to be, so a couple of us are moms. Humaira and I are moms. And so they snuck in a question for us specifically. So, you know, what are we doing differently now that we're mothers to bridge the gaps we saw growing up? So just really quickly, so for me, I'm raising boys. I don't have a daughter, but I'm definitely just more open, right? Age appropriate, of course. Having the ability to be open and understanding the experiences that, you know, my kids are going to go through because I went through them. I mean, they look at us and they think like, oh my God, you know, you guys are so old, but we get it. Like, I get it. You know, my son's going to be going into middle school and I'm like super nervous. But just being able to have those conversations, you know, about puberty and, you know, things like that, and just being open about it, I think is in itself, definitely bringing a change. Just having the ability to have those conversations. So, Hamara, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Okay, thank you. So, as a mother, I know that it's probably very important to instill core values so that whatever your child, and I have a son, I don't have a daughter either, can follow the right path. However, at the same time, I think it's important for us to balance what we feel is a core value versus what truly is a core value, because I think that's where some of that gap was when I was growing up versus today. So for him, I want to be able to teach him that really there's nothing big or small that he can't accomplish. And the most important thing for me, for him to know as far as I'm concerned, is that I want him to be happy. And so in whatever that means, it doesn't mean, I mean, for him to be a doctor or engineer or a lawyer or whatnot, that's not important for me, but really what makes him happy. And I know that he's not, and I want him to know that he's not living for me or, the other people out here that he may know, but really I want him to understand and know that he's living for himself. And that I want him to never to quit and to continuously try and try again. Because I should know that we'll fall and things will happen that are out of our control. But that doesn't mean that, we need to quit. And that doesn't mean that, there may be people out there that may not accept what he does. And that's okay, as long as he's happy and he's, going the right path. I'll always be by his side to support him. So I want to make sure that he understands that I'm always there with him. And as long as he's happy, he's moving the right path in whatever it is, personal, professional, whatever. So that's what I want to teach him.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, like, for me also, it's about validation, validating how they feel. For example, for example, if they're crying, not tell them like, oh, there's nothing to cry about. Why are you crying? It's more like, okay, why are you crying? Why are you upset? What can I do to help you get through this? It's just validating them as people, as, them having experiences, focusing on the things that they're doing right. Because I think when I was growing up, it was always about like what you can't do. You can't do this, you can't do that. Instead of, well, what am I doing right? So really, and I see that like I try to have those conversations like with younger people too. Especially like I have a younger cousin I'm really close to. So I always try to have those conversations with her and just let her know that, it's okay for her to like pursue her truth. And, eventually like her parents, will come, will see her happiness and her security, and, they'll be supportive. So now back to my other question that I totally butchered. How can our generation of Afghan-American maternal figures help build a more resilient generation of women based on the experiences we have? So I'm going to turn it over to Fatima.
All right. Sumaya, you're great. You're doing wonderfully. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, you and Humaira. Like, having a mother's perspective is so important and relevant. But yeah, you know what I actually thought of when you were saying that question? I honed in on the word resilience. And me coming from like a public health perspective, I think of resilience a lot in a lot of ways in a lot of my work. And just from like a general definition, it's like resilience is the ability to bounce back from adversity. And there's a few things that are associated with it, coming from my perspective. But the things that I know is having, a balanced perspective in life, a sense of purpose in life, the ability to keep going despite setbacks, recognition, and this is, it's called existential aloneness, which is the recognition of one's unique path and the acceptance of one's life. And then self-reliance, which is the belief in one's self and capabilities. And this is what I've come to know in, at least in public health literature and in a lot of the literature that I've been researching on. And resilience is just, it's so, there's obviously all the things that I read off, there's just so many different components to it. I just keep coming back to that general definition of, bouncing back from adversity, and what is it that we can have that enables us to have this, this personality trait that, which is so important, having resilience. It's been shown to just like, be able to improve your health outcomes, your mental health outcomes, have so many positive, like positive things in your life, and being able to grow that within the next generation. Like, oh gosh, that's such a loaded question, right? Like, where do you even start? And I think that, come what may, being able to have, right, like a perspective on life where you're just taking into account everything. So when I'm talking to the younger generation, when I'm talking to girls younger than me who are in high school, who are starting college, um, you know, coming, like seeing their world, interacting with their world in a way where, hey, I'm here representing a lot of different things, especially Afghan-American women. Like, you're Afghan, you come with an Afghan culture, you are like fully immersed in an American culture. You have so many things about you that are like filling you up. Like, you have such a nuanced perspective to life, a perspective to life where you're viewing the world in a way where, it's so unique to you, and to recognize that, to recognize your differences and to embrace them, and to not like want to be like part of everything else, like just embracing that, I'm Afghan, I'm a little different because of it, and it's great. And then, that meaningfulness, I think, is a journey that everyone has to figure out for themselves. Like, what do you derive meaning from, and where is that purpose that that you're seeking? And I leave that up to, whatever the person decides, whatever my little cousin like thinks is meaningful for her. I want her to go after it, and to persevere, the ability to keep going despite setbacks. It's not something I can teach entirely, because I'm not that far yet, but I know I've come across my own like personal, setbacks in life that have been really hard for me, and I lead by example. And I think that's something that I do a lot with, at least with when you're encountering struggles in life. You lead by example, and you show the younger generation that, that you can bounce back. And if it's something like a bad grade or a personal loss, everything, is on a spectrum, but it can be addressed, and you can get through it. And I could go on and on about this. I don't want to take too much time, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Fatima. Fatima has a way of just keeping us all super honest, and throwing in facts, and like just so thank you. For just like you, I totally focused on resilience as well. And what I thought when I think of resilience, I really thought about it today, was when it comes to Afghan women, I always think of physical, emotional, verbal abuse or trauma when I think of resilience. I have that it sets up an expectation that women experiencing these traumas will just bounce back because it's their nature. And then we often, like the women who don't bounce back, we ostracize them, like, she needs to get her shit together type of attitude. And then it almost feels to me that resilience means, well, you just have to take it with a smile. Whatever is thrown at you, whether, it's abuse, whatever it is, you just have to take it with a smile. You can't let anybody see your pain. You can't show your pain. And I've always associated, I don't think I've always, but I just like had that realization today that that's what resilience kind of meant to me when in the context of Afghan women. So it's important for me to, I think, create spaces, especially like for younger women or like my cousins, that, that empower them to live their truth, that they can lead their decisions with confidence, like they can make their decisions with confidence, So whether that means, pursuing a higher degree, a career path outside of the Afghan norm of like doctor, engineer, whatever that may be, with relationships, or like leaving an abusive relationship, knowing when a relationship is abusive and it's time to leave, and taking that and having the confidence to leave, and knowing that that's wrong and that you deserve better, or ending toxic friendships, even with family, relationships with family. So for me, resilience is not just about like, putting a Band-Aid over those experiences. It's really understanding, that those experiences, these things that happen to us are wrong, and it's okay for us to feel pain. That's part of it, is allowing yourself to feel that pain. So ultimately, for me, it's like just creating, conversations, or having conversations, and creating a space where these women know that it's okay for them to live their truth. And at the end of the day, once they're happy, the people around them, the people who truly, truly love them and support them, will be happy for them. Yeah. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yasaman.
Yeah, I mean, everything that you guys have mentioned so far, Fatma, Sumaya, I think is so valuable and whatnot. And just to add on top of that, I was taking notes as you guys were talking, things that were coming up to mind. I think one of them is like self-love and acceptance. And Fatma, you talked about this a little bit. I think, this is not the whole Afghan community, but kind of a little bit in terms of how I grew up, is I didn't hear I did hear, but I think we could do a better job, I think, moving forward, about letting people know that like you are good enough. You don't necessarily have to hit these thresholds in life to be of value, and you yourself are already valuable. And these are ways that you can show your value to others and help others with it, I think is really powerful. The other one I put down is unconditional love, love and support to others. And Fatma, you talked about kind of being an example for your younger cousins, and I see that for myself as well. But I think that's also hard to navigate sometimes, because you want to give this unconditional love and support, but I also don't know exactly like how that looks like, or like what that means in context sometimes. Like, what if there are times where you want to put your foot down, and that is still an unconditional love. You just don't want someone to fall off the cliff, and they might not know that they're about to do that. And then the other one I put down is vulnerability, and allowing for others to be vulnerable, and that it's totally fine. My boss made a comment last week about something, my one-on-one. He's like, you're very resilient, but you don't have to be this resilient. He's like, there are certain situations that it's okay to take yourself out of. You don't have to put yourself through this. And it was like, that's true. Like, I do see myself as being resilient and gritty, but yes, I don't have to be in this situation all the time. And I think passing that on to others would be really valuable.
I completely agree with everything you guys have all said so far. One thing that I think is really important for us to make sure that we pass on to the next generation is communication, because I feel like that is something that, like we said, we're so resilient because we don't know how to communicate when things are too much for us, because we just learned to deal, or how to express self-love, or how to tell people that we love them. I feel like we just kind of, Afghan-American women, we just kind of like, learn to keep it all here, keep it all thin. Don't ever air out your dirty laundry. Don't ever talk about your trials and tribulations or your hardships, or if you're having trouble with anything like that, if you need support, any of that. I think it's really important that the next generation realize that they have a support system and that they use it, but they need to say it. They need to use their words and let us know when they need someone to, like a shoulder to lean on, or some guidance from anything, and making sure that you keep those communication channels open. So like when it comes to even normalizing conversations about sex or women's health, or, just like navigating our identities as Afghan-American women, when it comes to just like existing in this world, communication, I think, is really important. And I really would want to stress that the next generation develop better communication skills, because I feel like our generation is learning to let things, to communicate and use our words more, and reach out to those that are support systems for us. But I think it's definitely a key thing to make sure that we maintain healthy mindsets.
Thank you, everyone, for your for your thoughts. And yeah, I definitely agree. I think communication is certainly key. I think it just having a better way of communicating really solves so many issues. So I think that is an important point to take away for tonight's discussion. So we are at the end of the hour, the top of the hour. We want to thank everyone for joining us. We feel incredibly privileged to have the opportunity to have this space for these discussions. So we hope that, our experiences resonate with everyone watching, and that you walk away knowing that, our experiences are universal. So until next time, thank you and have a good night.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.